Transport Secretary Grant Shapps is with us. Mr Shapps, what are you going to do? The strike's here, it's happened, you've got a cabinet meeting in an hour or so. What's on the agenda?
Morning. Yeah, well, look, first of all, for everyone who's struggling to get into work today, people who are missing their hospital appointments and kids, including mine this week, having their exams disrupted, I'm very, very sorry about what's happened on our railways. Unfortunately, the unions have walked out of the talks, which were ongoing, and I think very unnecessarily, because there was a pay increase on the cards, on the table for them as well. In terms of what we're going to do, we're trying to put in all the mitigations that we can, trying to help, but it is not easy. We can't just replace 2,500 stations and 20,000 miles of track that are normally carrying commuters around the place, but we want to see this resolved as quickly as possible.
Andrew Haynes, who's the Chief Executive of Network Rail, said, in fact, that Mick Lynch did not walk out of the talks. It was just that they couldn't speak to him because there was a rally on at the time. So I think that it's interesting, isn't it, that it's in your interest to sort of say those sorts of things, but when you actually check them out, they don't actually come up true.
I was actually talking about yesterday when they left the talks, called a press conference and said these strikes were going ahead.
Why aren't you in the room? You've obviously said, and other ministers have said, look, it's an issue between employers and their employees. But, of course, ultimately, it is your responsibility. You know, you are the person in charge of Network Rail. When Network Rail are faced with something from the RMT, they have to come out of the room and call the government to find out whether they can accept it or not, surely. I mean, it is your responsibility. Yeah. You've been accused of having a grave dereliction of duty in not being there.
Well, first of all, they don't have to come out of the room and do that. That's completely untrue. Secondly, of course, the government ultimately, whether it's teachers or nurses or firefighters or railway workers, ultimately, of course, has a big part to play. We are, after all, the government. This is public service. It's public money, by and large. So, of course, we have a big responsibility. But it is always the case that it is the unions and the employers that always have to sit down and discuss and negotiate. If I thought there was even a 1 in a million chance of it making the slightest bit of difference, then of course I would go in the room. But it's not the way that these things work. And frankly, for the unions who've unnecessarily called this strike, telling their workers that there wasn't a pay rise this year, when in fact there was always going to be one because we'd come off the coronavirus freeze, to then blame other people for the strikes, which are their responsibilities, I think is completely out of order. The only reason there are strikes going on is because quite a militant union here won't reform its working practices, doesn't seem to be very appreciative that every single person watching this programme has paid £600 in taxes, £16 billion in total, to keep the railways going so that not a single member of railway staff lost their job during coronavirus. And this is the way that we're being repaid as a nation for that money and that support that we put in, which I think is a great shame.
And every single person watching this programme, every single person in this studio knows that this thing is going to be settled. It's not going to go on forever. It will be settled. And the big question is, why can't we get to a settlement quickly? And it doesn't seem to be remotely within reaching distance. What do you think would be a sensible settlement to this dispute? Look into the crystal ball and tell us what you'd be prepared to give or see the rail companies give.
Actually, I said there's already a pay offer on the table. And, of course, naturally, what the rail unions want is more money. I should point out that they're not badly paid. The median salary, the average salary, is £44,000 for railway workers. It's £59,000 for a train driver. So they're not badly paid, but they want more money. There is a lot of reform, modernisation of the railways that could take place. So, for example, when it comes to maintenance, 2 vans often have to be sent out because those are the union rules, when 1 van would do the job. Rostering doesn't work effectively. Timesheets are still kept manually on paper much of the time when they should be digitised. Lots of simple reforms which would mean that we would save money on running the railways, and then of course could do more with the unions. But they're blocking all of that, and I'm really sad for I don't know, the millions of people being impacted upon it today. The irony is that people who are probably better paid and can work from home, white-collar workers so-called, probably won't be super affected because of coronavirus. They can work from home. The people who'll be really impacted are the lowest paid workers who physically have to turn up for their jobs, perhaps a cleaner at a hospital who can't get to work. So they're actually hurting the very people they claim they want to help, which is the greatest irony and greatest pity.
They are certainly very determined. We interviewed Mick Lynch earlier. We played him a segment of an interview we did yesterday with an oncologist, a man whose job it is to save lives and to prolong life with people who've got cancer. And this oncologist, making a completely apolitical point, said that he was absolutely certain that lives were going to be lost because of this dispute, because people can't get in to perform treatments and people can't get in to get treatments. Now, Mick Lynch said that that was twaddle. He said he just didn't accept any of that. And the impression that was widely taken from the interview that we did with Mr Lynch was that he certainly is intractable on all points which are critical of the strike. It could go on for a heck of a long time, couldn't it?
Well, you can see there what we're up against, I'm afraid. It is that kind of approach, which means it's been difficult to settle. But what we're going to do to prevent this from impacting people's lives forever is take a number of steps. Network Rail have written to the unions last night, I see, and said to them that they'll now undertake some of these modernisation reforms because once you get to a strike situation, it enables you to legally continue with the reforms that we were trying to negotiate. In addition, we'll be changing some laws to ensure that we can run more of a service even on strike days and have more transferability, have staff doing sensible things as you would in any other company. We have a situation where the rules go back in some cases to 1919, the year 1919, that is. For example, we're working on, or not working on Sundays. In fact, the entire rail service only works on Sundays, a day where a lot of people in hospitality need to get into work, through the goodwill of staff. Well, it should be in the contract. It should just be like any other business. And so we've got to have this modernisation now.
Will you be looking at changing the law to allow companies to hire, well, in this case, Network Rail, to hire agency staff to pick up the workload? And what implication does that have for safety? Because that in itself is an issue on hiring agency staff to maintain the network.
It's a law which tends to be called agency working, but actually what it's about in this case for Network Rail, because these are typically highly specialised jobs where somebody couldn't just walk in from outside, is actually being able to transfer a skill from one place to another. So to give you an example, Network Rail run control rooms and you'll have somebody sat at one computer screen being told they can't be asked to sit at the next one, even though they're fully qualified and trained to do so, because the union says they can't just sit at the next desk. It's that sort of transferability that we're going to allow, and yes, we're going to introduce a law to do that in pretty quick order.
The RMT is unequivocal when they say that this is, and Mr Lynch is unequivocal when he says this is absolutely a punch-up about pay and conditions. It's as simple as that. There are other analysts who say that they detect a political collision, similar to the miners' strike in the 1970s, which was eventually put down by the Thatcher government. Do you see it as an ideological clash, or do you think it really is just a case of pay and conditions?
For us, it's certainly not ideological. I just want our trains to run. I love the railways. I want them to operate. I want passengers to be able to get on them. I fear for the unions, it is very ideological. Mick Lynch, who you're just referring to, the head of the unions, has said that he's nostalgic for union power. So I think we see this is what they're doing. He's called them out under false pretext because he said there wasn't going to be a pay rise. There had been a pay freeze for the last couple of years, as with the rest of the public sector under coronavirus. He told his workers there was not going to be a pay rise, when in fact the pay freeze had ended and there was always going to be one. And he told them that this was about compulsory job losses. We've actually had a voluntary redundancy scheme running. It's way oversubscribed. So actually the chances are we can do this modernisation primarily through voluntary redundancy. So he's brought the workers out under a false pretence when there is a pay offer on the table, and all we need is to modernise our railways and get them working for people again. So it's outrageous people can't get to work today, can't get to those hospital appointments. We want that to change.
You prepared for 6 months of this? Longer, if necessary?
Well, as I say, yes is the answer, but I really hope it doesn't take that long. And we will change laws. We will absolutely do everything possible to protect the travelling public, to make sure that we can't be held to ransom as a nation by an extremist union who seem to want to live in another era. We want a railway that works for everyone.
Okay.
Passengers being able to get their trains and get to work and get to the hospital appointments.
Transport Secretary, you've made your points this morning. Thank you so much for being on the programme. Of course, we have in the programme heard from Mick Lynch too. There was lots of praise for him. So if you're just tuning in and you think it's all sounding a bit one-sided, we've had Mick Lynch on this morning.
No, there's full balance here. But I have to say, seeing both sides of the argument put there by him and by Mick Lynch earlier, it really is a case of that. There doesn't seem to be... And Network Rail. There seems to be absolutely no wiggle room at all at the moment for negotiation. They are absolutely head-to-head, both sides.